I need a win this week in fantasy. I need it bad. Welcome to Fantasy Huddle, brought to you by Norton, because every click matters. I'm Shehadi alongside Jamey Eisenberg. I need a win. I have 3 more players. I've got to beat this girl. She's been talking trash.
Who do you still have left?
I have Meacham, Ryan, and Colston.
Way to be prepared.
That's right.
3 good options. You're going to win.
I'm ready to go. 2 developments in Houston. Let's start with Owen Daniels, that knee injury. She actually had him. Never a good thing when you're talking about a knee. Are we talking the rest of the season?
It sounds that way. It's not looking good. We're going to wait to hear what Coach Gary Kubiak has to say. But, when you see Owen Daniels leave the game and he's talking about possibly a torn ACL, just a tremendous blow, not only to the Texans, but also to fantasy owners, because Daniels has been one of, if not the best tight ends this season. He was coming into Week 8 as the #1 fantasy tight end. He was just playing absolutely unbelievable. Heading into a contract year, you can understand why he's going to be disappointed and why fantasy owners are definitely going to miss him. Now, I'm sure you'll get into this with Dave when you talk about some move makers coming up in the next few videos, but some tight ends that could be available. Fred Davis for Washington, who's going to replace Chris Cooley. You have Kevin Bost, Hot Heat, Benjamin Watson. Maybe if you're lucky, Vernon Davis is still out there. There could be some tight ends on the waiver wire that could help you. Fred Davis is the guy I'm going to try and target because I actually will lose Owen Daniels in one of my leagues.
Okay, keep an eye on all of them. Keep an eye on Ryan Moats. Now, Steve Slayton needs to hold on to the ball. That's been his problem. Ryan Moats comes in, kind of shows him up, Jamey. What does that mean?
Well, when you lose 5 fumbles, that's a bad sign for the Texans, bad sign for fantasy owners, because Steve Slayton's just one of those guys that hasn't been producing at the level that you were hoping for. Now, the good thing is he's been producing in the receiving game. If you look at his stats for the course of the season, his numbers have really been good as a result of what he's done catching the ball out of the backfield, because Ryan Moats in one game against Buffalo has more rushing touchdowns than Slayton has for the season. Now, again, we're going to have to wait to see what Coach Kubiak says going forward and who they're going to use as their starting running back. But this is what you were expecting from a guy as the starting running back for this offense. Now, this offense is going to change because no Owen Daniels in there. They could go to some more 3 and 4 wide receiver sets, so maybe Jacoby Jones, maybe David Anderson is now on the field a little bit more. Some of the backup tight end options, Joel Dreesen is one. James Casey is another one. So maybe some of these backup tight ends will see an increased role. But then in terms of the running back spot, if Ryan Moats is available, and in terms of Sunday, what we saw in terms of his ownership percentage, he's available in every league on CBSSports.com. So go out and grab him, especially if you own Steve Slayton, and then we'll just have to find out over the next few days who's going to be the starting running back there.
In terms of Sunday, what about Brett Favre? Jamey, I used to live in Minot, North Dakota, and everyone there, all my friends, they were just waiting to see how Brett Favre did in Lambeau. He did incredible. Still only starting in 44% of leagues. What gives?
So all 5 people in Minot, North Dakota?
Stop it right now. It's the best town on earth.
Well, you said all your friends. That's like 5 people, right?
I have a lot of friends there. Thank you very much.
That's hard to believe. I think when you talk about Brett Favre, and you got to pick him up and you got to start him at this point. I mean, he's just been playing absolutely ridiculous. 16 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. Forget about just the 2 games against Green Bay. He's been good for the course of the season. You look at his receiving targets: Sidney Rice, Bernard Berrien, Percy Harvin, Visanthe Shenko. He's throwing the ball to Adrian Peterson out of the backfield. Teams are daring him to throw. And you look at what he has facing him the rest of the season. He's going to be put in the scenario where he's going to continue to throw. I don't think you're going to find 12 quarterbacks better than him. Right now he's in the top 10 of fantasy quarterbacks over the course of the season. I think definitely Favre is worth starting. Now, again, if you have an Aaron Rodgers, if you have a Tom Brady, if you have Drew Brees or Peyton Manning, you're not going to start Favre over these guys. But
really? Over Aaron Rodgers? You wouldn't?
No, Rodgers has been playing better. I mean, even you look at the game Sunday, Rodgers' stats were just as good as Favre with 1 less touchdown. So I think you look at, depending on who you have, you're not going to start Favre over those guys. But Favre is in the mix now for definitely being considered as a starting fantasy quarterback. And again, one of those scenarios where you play the matchups. If Jay Cutler's struggling, if Roethlisberger starts to struggle at some point, Schaub starts to struggle now that Owen Daniels isn't there. If you have Favre, it's time to consider starting him.
He got through that little patch of difficult schedule: Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Green Bay. He was 2 out of 3, right? He got 2 wins out of 3.
Absolutely.
All right. They were playing on the opposite sidelines, Chris Johnson and Maurice Jones-Drew, but they put on a show, and for Jacksonville, MJD was all they had, Jamey.
Yeah, 8 carries, and he put up all this kind of production, 170-plus yards rushing. This is what you hope for when you drafted these guys. You hope for games like this. Now, granted, they're not going to do this every week, but you got to hope that this type of performance continues where we're seeing consistent double digits in fantasy points. Now, Jones-Drew has been pretty good for the most part this season. Chris Johnson has had really 2 big games, week 2 against Houston and then this past week against the Jaguars. So hopefully this is what these teams will start to use as their identity. The Jacksonville Jaguars have to give Jones-Drew more carries. He could have had a 200-plus yard game himself. And then Chris Johnson, coming off of a bye week for Tennessee, they finally get their first win because they go back to what they started to do best last year, is run the ball short underneath passes. We saw Vince Young come in as the starter. The offense finally started to look like what we saw last year. Now, again, Tennessee's not going to continue to play at this level, but I do think that Johnson could get going, and maybe we'll start to see Landell White also.
Will we see Jonathan Stewart and DeAngelo Williams continue what they did? Now, Stewart was the one that got into the end zone twice, but both of them had pretty good numbers.
You know, it's amazing because Arizona came into that game as the #1 run defense in the NFL, and they just got obliterated.
Ran all over them.
So that was just a strange game. You know, if you look at what happened last year in the playoff game, Carolina was the hot team coming into the playoffs. Jake Delhomme has the 6-turnover game, and his season just starts off really just a mess this year. And then they go to Arizona, which has been playing at a high level the last couple of weeks. And sure enough, Kurt Warner has a 6-turnover game. They can't stop the run, and we finally see Jonathan Stewart and DeAngelo Williams. This is what you were hoping for from these two guys. Williams getting the yardage and playing at a high level. He's been pretty good for the most part. Stewart's been hit or miss, and this is the type of thing you have to hope for them going forward. Delhomme doesn't have a turnover, finally plays well. Steve Smith scores his first touchdown, so that was good to see. So maybe this offense is starting to turn the corner a little bit. We'll see what they do in the next few weeks. I think they have at New Orleans in Week 9, so we'll see if the Saints on a short week. The Saints defense has been pretty good, but again, Carolina just ran through the best run defense in the NFL, so we'll see if these guys keep it going.
Well, Jamey, it's time for a little injury talk. Kevin Smith on this list. I want to know the extent of his injury. Do we know it? How severe?
Well, I think he's going to be okay. Reports after the game were that he should be able to play in Week 9 against Seattle, and that should be a good matchup for him because you look at the way that the Seahawks have played recently in run defense. They did a decent job against the Cowboys in Week 8, but Marion Barber did score a touchdown, and Kevin Smith didn't have the type of game we were hoping for, but I think the injury had something to do with that in terms of his matchup with the Rams on Sunday. So I think you'll see Kevin Smith should be able to play, should be able to be okay, and I think you should consider to start him as a #2 fantasy running back. The biggest injury to keep an eye on this list, I think, is going to be Anquan Boldin with his ankle problem. Came into this game dealing with the injury and just wasn't able to play through it. Jake Delhomme should be fine. Same thing with Aaron Rodgers, and Devin Hester should be okay also.
You've been working so much, you're losing your voice.
I know.
Well,
Terrible.
Thank you for all your advice. I need 18 points. I'm going to get it, hopefully. For Jamey Eisenberg, I'm Lauren Shehadi. We'll see y'all soon.